Nearby, a small boy, Elias, stood on the cracked sidewalk clutching a worn paperback. His clothes, faded but clean, were a stark contrast to the polished sheen of the helicopter and the designer outfits of the adults. He wasn't gawking with childish wonder. Instead, his gaze was fixed, analytical, on a specific part of the helicopter's undercarriage. His head tilted almost imperceptibly, as if listening to a frequency no one else could detect. He looked like an afterthought, a stray shadow on the edges of a very important, very expensive problem, completely invisible to the powerful figures consumed by their predicament. The scene was set, not with a bang, but with the quiet hum of ignored brilliance and the loud roar of frustrated privilege. John Sterling's voice boomed, cutting through the mechanical hum. "This is unacceptable. I have a flight to Geneva in 3 hours. What exactly am I paying you all for?" His words were laced with a thinly veiled contempt, aimed squarely at the engineers who shuffled their feet, their faces a mix of embarrassment and professional defeat. One, a man with grease-stained hands, muttered something about a complex electrical anomaly, but Sterling waved him off dismissively. The helicopter, a symbol of his power and punctuality, was grounded, and that fact alone was an intolerable affront to his meticulously ordered world. His fury seemed to radiate outwards, pushing away any unwanted presence. Elias, oblivious to the millionaire's tirade, took a small step closer, his focus unwavering. His brow furrowed slightly, a silent, intense concentration etched onto his young face. He wasn't trying to intrude, rather he was drawn by an invisible thread, an intricate puzzle only he seemed to perceive. The metallic scent of jet fuel mixed with the crisp aroma of cut grass, a sensory tapestry that, for him, held more meaning than the frustrated shouts of the adults. The engineers, engrossed in their own technical discussions and Sterling's angry demands, didn't even register his presence, a tiny, unassuming figure against the grandeur of the halted machine. A security guard, noticing Elias's proximity, took a slow, deliberate step towards him. The guard's expression was not overtly hostile, but it carried the weariness of someone accustomed to shooing away curious children and nosy neighbors from private affairs. He raised a hand, a silent but firm command to keep his distance, a barrier erected not just against physical intrusion, but against the very idea of an outsider observing this spectacle of high-stakes inconvenience. Elias didn't flinch, his eyes still fixed on the helicopter, his mind miles away from the social implications of his presence, lost in the intricate dance of gears and wires that called to him. The guard finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "All right, son. Best keep clear. This isn't a playground." He didn't wait for a response, his gaze already shifting back to the frustrated millionaire, eager to return to his primary duty of maintaining order and protecting property. For Elias, the words were just background noise, a meaningless blip in the grand symphony of the helicopter's subtle, underlying distress. He was dismissed, not just by the words, but by the casual, almost reflexive way in which his presence was deemed irrelevant, a non-entity in a world that valued loud declarations over quiet observations. The injustice hung in the air, a silent testament to a world that often failed to see beyond the obvious. Elias wasn't just a boy. He was a silent observer, a living sensor. His light brown hair, slightly unruly, framed a face often lost in thought, his fair skin almost translucent against the sharp lines of his jaw. His eyes, an unusual shade of grey-green, held a depth that belied his age, constantly scanning, analyzing, absorbing details that most people simply filtered out. Today they were fixated on the subtle vibration emanating from the helicopter, a low hum that resonated not just in his ears, but deep within his chest, a discordant note in the mechanical symphony. He wore a simple, faded blue t-shirt and worn jeans, his posture slightly hunched, as if trying to shrink into himself and become even less noticeable in the bustling, frustrated scene. His mind, a complex tapestry of interconnected patterns and logical sequences, was already dissecting the helicopter's distress. He didn't just hear the noise, he felt its frequency, recognized its rhythm, and instinctively compared it to the thousands of other mechanical sounds he had catalogued in his memory. For Elias, the world wasn't a collection of objects, but a vast, intricate machine, each part moving in relation to another. The helicopter's malfunction wasn't a mystery. It was a puzzle, a series of misaligned gears or a broken circuit waiting to be correctly reassembled, a challenge that his brain eagerly accepted, even as his body remained still and unassuming. Memories flickered behind his eyes, vivid and precise, the intricate gears of his grandfather's antique clock, the precise click of a bicycle chain, the subtle whine of a worn-out fan motor. Each sound, each mechanism, was a piece of an enormous mental library, cross-referenced and meticulously categorized. He recalled the time the old washing machine at home had stopped, and how, after hours of his mother's frustrated attempts, he had quietly reconnected a loose wire, restoring its rhythmic hum. These weren't just memories, they were data points, informing his current analysis of the grounded aircraft, a silent conversation between his unique intellect and the ailing machine. His perception of the world was a heightened reality. The scent of jet fuel wasn't just gasoline, it was a complex chemical composition. The glint of sunlight on chrome wasn't just light, it was a specific wavelength, reflecting off a precise metallic surface. This granular level of sensory input, often overwhelming for others, was his natural state, allowing him to perceive subtleties that went unnoticed by the typical observer. He processed information with a speed and depth that few could comprehend, making connections that seemed miraculous to those who operated on a more superficial level of understanding, a quiet genius observing the chaos. He felt the frustration of the engineers, not as an emotional response but as a disruptive energy, a chaotic vibration in the otherwise orderly world of machines. Their agitated movements, their loud voices, created a dissonant hum that grated against his internal sense of order. He didn't understand their social intricacies, their hierarchies, or their concerns about time and money. He only understood the helicopter's problem, the clear, logical steps needed to bring it back into alignment. Their distress was merely an obstacle, a layer of noise obscuring the clear signal of the mechanical issue at hand, a problem to be solved, not just observed. Elias's stillness was often misinterpreted as disinterest or a lack of engagement, a common misunderstanding that plagued his interactions. In truth, his quiet exterior masked an intense inner world, a vibrant landscape of thought and sensation. He communicated not through words, but through his profound focus, his unwavering gaze, and the almost imperceptible shifts in his posture. He wasn't withdrawn from the world. He was deeply, profoundly immersed in it, experiencing its raw data with an intensity that most could only imagine. His quietness was not emptiness, but a vast, silent ocean of understanding, waiting for the right moment to reveal its depths. Elias's days were largely spent within the drab institutional walls of Northwood Elementary, a public school in a less affluent district of Dallas. The building, with its chipped paint and worn linoleum floors, felt less like a place of learning and more like a holding pen for young, restless minds. His classroom, a chaotic symphony of shouting children and the incessant hum of fluorescent lights, was a constant assault on his heightened senses. The rules were rigid, the schedules inflexible, and any deviation from the norm was met with swift, often unthinking correction. It was an environment designed for conformity, not for the blossoming of unique intellects like his, leaving him feeling perpetually out of sync with its demands. The neighborhood itself, a patchwork of modest homes and struggling small businesses, was a microcosm of the challenges Elias faced. Children played boisterously in the streets, their games and conversations a confusing cacophony to his ears. He preferred the quiet solitude of his backyard, meticulously examining the intricate patterns on a leaf or dismantling and reassembling old discarded electronics. The community, while not overtly hostile, simply didn't have the framework to recognize or nurture a genius like Elias, seeing him instead as merely different or a bit odd, another quiet child in a noisy world. The oppressive structure was evident in every interaction. When Elias meticulously arranged his crayons by color spectrum rather than grabbing them randomly, he was told to hurry up. When he spent an entire math lesson absorbed in the complex patterns of the classroom's ceiling tiles, he was reprimanded for not paying attention. These everyday moments, seemingly minor, accumulated into a powerful message. His way of being, his unique intelligence, was not valued, was not even seen. It was a subtle, insidious form of exclusion, slowly eroding his confidence and reinforcing his perceived inadequacy in a world that refused to see his true brilliance. Elias's unique talents often manifested in ways that went unnoticed or were actively dismissed. Once, during a particularly chaotic school assembly, the microphone system began emitting a high-pitched, piercing feedback. Adults winced and covered their ears, scrambling to find the source of the malfunction. Elias, however, stood perfectly still, his head tilted, his eyes tracing an invisible line to the ceiling-mounted speakers. Without a word, he walked directly to a specific spot on the stage, reached up, and with a small, precise twist, adjusted a loose wire on the back of a large amplifier, instantly silencing the piercing screech. The adults, relieved, simply assumed he had accidentally bumped it, never connecting his action to a deliberate solution. Another time, during a particularly frustrating computer lab session, all the machines suddenly crashed, displaying an inscrutable error message across their screens. The teacher, flustered, called the IT department, anticipating a long wait. Elias, instead of idly waiting, walked around the lab, his fingers lightly brushing the back of each computer tower. He stopped at one, leaned down, and with a quiet click, reset a power strip hidden behind the desk, bringing all the computers back to life. The teacher, too overwhelmed by the sudden return of functionality, simply praised the IT department for their quick remote fix, completely missing Elias's quiet act of intricate logical problem-solving right in front of her. His understanding of numbers was equally profound, though often misconstrued. During a math test, while other students struggled with long division, Elias would rapidly fill his paper with a series of seemingly arbitrary symbols and lines, arriving at the correct answer through a method entirely unique to him. Mrs. Jenkins, seeing his unorthodox calculations, often marked his answers incorrect despite their accuracy, insisting he show his work in the prescribed manner. His brilliant, intuitive grasp of complex mathematical relationships was stifled by a rigid system that valued method over accurate, efficient results, failing to see the genius in his unconventional approach. He possessed an uncanny ability to detect patterns in everything. The subtle shifting of leaves in the wind, the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet, the precise order in which his grandmother arranged her spices, all were data points in a vast, interconnected system his mind was constantly mapping. This hyper-awareness often led to him noticing impending issues before anyone else. He once predicted a specific electrical outage in their neighborhood based on the flickering intensity of the streetlights days prior, a phenomenon dismissed by Martha as simply Elias being Elias, attributing it to coincidence rather than his acute observational and predictive abilities. His interest in mechanical objects was not just curiosity, it was an innate understanding of their fundamental principles. He could spend hours dissecting old broken appliances, not just to see how they worked, but to understand why they worked and how they could be improved. He once reconfigured an old, stuttering radio into a surprisingly clear receiver, using discarded wires and a tin can. His grandmother, amazed, told her friends Elias was good with his hands, a kindly but superficial assessment that completely missed the sophisticated engineering mind at work, seeing only the manual dexterity, not the profound cognitive process. These small, undeniable flashes of brilliance were like subtle whispers in a loud room, easily drowned out by the noise of conventional expectations and biases. No one truly saw the depth of his intellect, the intricate web of connections his mind was constantly weaving. His gifts were hidden in plain sight, dismissed as quirks, coincidences, or just child's play. The world around him was too busy looking for traditional signs of intelligence, verbal fluency, social conformity, academic performance, to recognize the quiet, powerful genius that resided within Elias, slowly blossoming despite the lack of nurture or understanding from those around him. The constant dismissal chipped away at Elias, though he rarely showed it outwardly. He began to withdraw further into himself, finding solace in the predictable patterns of his own making rather than the chaotic, often incomprehensible world of social interaction. During recess, while other children chased each other across the dusty playground, Elias would sit by himself beneath a large oak tree, meticulously organizing small pebbles into intricate geometric designs. Each stone, each placement, was a silent act of control in a world that often felt overwhelmingly out of his control. A small pocket of order he could always rely on amidst the swirling confusion. The emotional cost of being misunderstood weighed heavily on him, manifesting in subtle ways. He sometimes chewed on the inside of his cheek until it was raw, a nervous habit that intensified when he felt overwhelmed or frustrated by an inability to communicate his thoughts. His appetite, normally steady, would sometimes wane for days after a particularly trying interaction at school, a silent protest from his body against the stress of constant misinterpretation. He learned to construct an almost impenetrable wall of quietness around himself, a defense mechanism against a world that seemed determined to either ignore or invalidate his unique way of being. His hidden rituals became his anchors. Every morning he would meticulously arrange his breakfast cereal into a perfect circle before eating it, ensuring each flake had its designated place. Before bed, he would trace the lines of the wallpaper in his room, memorizing the subtle imperfections and patterns, a comforting, repetitive motion that calmed his racing mind. These were not mere quirks. They were essential coping mechanisms, private ballets of precision that allowed him to regulate his sensory input and maintain a sense of internal stability when the external world became too loud, too unpredictable, or too demanding. The contrast between his brilliant internal world and the cruel, often neglectful reality he inhabited was stark and painful. Inside his mind, complex equations solved themselves. Intricate mechanical systems hummed with perfect efficiency, and patterns revealed their hidden logic. Outside, he was a silent, odd child, a puzzle nobody bothered to solve. He saw the world in high definition, while others perceived him in blurry outlines, a tragic disconnect that left him feeling perpetually alone even when surrounded by people. The quiet hum of his genius was tragically unheard, replaced by the grating noise of indifference. His isolation wasn't a choice, but a consequence. When he tried to explain a complex concept about how a car engine worked to a classmate, he was met with blank stares and derisive laughter. When he attempted to point out a logical flaw in a teacher's explanation, he was told he was being disruptive. Each attempt to bridge the gap between his understanding and theirs resulted in further alienation, reinforcing the painful lesson that his way of thinking was not welcome, not understood, and ultimately not valued by those around him. So, he retreated, his inner world becoming his sanctuary, a place where his brilliance could flourish unhindered by judgment or misunderstanding. He continued to observe, to analyze, to connect, his mind a vibrant engine of discovery, even as his outer demeanor remained still and unassuming. The world might not see his genius, might not appreciate the profound depth of his thought, but it couldn't stop it. His silence was not an absence of thought, but a profound wellspring of intelligence, waiting for the opportune moment to burst forth, a quiet defiance against a world that refused to see. His gaze then swept over the small crowd that had gathered, mostly curious neighbors drawn by the unusual spectacle. His eyes landed on Elias, still standing quietly at the edge of the property, his focus unwavering on the helicopter. A flash of irritation crossed Sterling's face. He disliked being observed in moments of vulnerability. "And what is he doing here?" Sterling barked, pointing at Elias. The security guard immediately stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Sterling waved him off, a new cruel idea forming in his mind, a chance to exert some control over the uncontrollable situation. "You boy!" Sterling called out, his voice sharp and condescending. Elias, startled by the direct address, slowly turned his head, his grey-green eyes meeting Sterling's impatient glare. The sudden spotlight on him made his stomach clench, a familiar wave of anxiety washing over him. The murmuring crowd shifted, their attention now fully on the exchange, a collective gasp of anticipation hanging in the humid air. Elias's hands instinctively moved to clasp each other, a self-soothing gesture as he waited for the inevitable onslaught of words. Sterling, emboldened by the boy's apparent timidity, continued, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Since my esteemed experts here seem utterly baffled, perhaps you have an idea. You've been staring at it long enough, haven't you? What's wrong with my helicopter, little genius? He emphasized little genius with a sneer, clearly intending to humiliate Elias in front of everyone, to highlight the absurdity of a child presuming to understand something that stumped highly paid professionals, a public spectacle designed to reinforce his own perceived superiority. A ripple of discomfort went through the onlookers. Some mothers pulled their children closer, sensing the cruelty of the moment. Mr. Chen and his team exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the unfairness of putting a child on the spot, especially one who clearly appeared overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Elias remained silent, his mind racing, processing the words, the tone, the implicit challenge. He didn't understand the mockery, only the question. A question that his brain had already instinctively begun to answer, the logic unfolding with crystalline clarity in his inner world. Sterling took Elias's silence as confirmation of his perceived inadequacy. He let out a condescending chuckle, a sound that grated on Elias's sensitive ears. Well, cat got your tongue? I suppose it's easier to stare than to actually comprehend, isn't it? He turned to the engineers with a smug expression. See, this is why we pay professionals. Some things are simply beyond the grasp of, well, of mere observation. The humiliation hung heavy in the air, a thick, suffocating blanket of scorn, designed to crush any shred of confidence in the quiet boy, leaving him exposed and vulnerable under the weight of judgment. A profound silence descended, thick with anticipation and unease. Elias, though inwardly reeling from the verbal assault, felt a strange clarity emerge. The insult, the humiliation, merely stripped away the distracting social noise, leaving only the pure, undeniable logic of the problem at hand. His eyes, now intensely focused, scanned the helicopter's undercarriage one more time, not seeing a complex machine but a system of interconnected parts, one of which was subtly, almost imperceptibly, out of alignment. His unique form of hyperfocus, often a source of misinterpretation, now became his superpower, sharpening his senses to an almost superhuman degree. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his worn sneakers scuffing softly on the pristine lawn. The security guard tensed, ready to intercept, but Sterling, too astonished by the boy's unexpected movement, simply watched, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Elias ignored them all. He was no longer in a millionaire's garden, no longer under the scornful gaze of adults. He was inside the helicopter's mechanism, visualizing its internal workings with startling precision, his mind dissecting the intricate dance of circuits and hydraulics, pinpointing the single, almost invisible flaw that had baffled the experts. Without a word, Elias knelt beside the helicopter's landing gear, his small fingers reaching with an almost surgical delicacy. His movements were precise, economical, devoid of any hesitation. He didn't fumble or guess. Each action was the culmination of countless hours spent observing, dismantling, and reassembling forgotten machines in his backyard. His fingers brushed against a small, recessed panel, finding the almost imperceptible seam where it met the fuselage. The engineers watched, their expressions shifting from irritation to a bewildered curiosity, unable to comprehend the quiet, purposeful intensity of the child before them. With a gentle, almost reverent touch, Elias pressed firmly on the edge of the panel. There was a faint, almost inaudible click, the sound of a latch settling into place, a connection completing. He then slid his hand further along the undercarriage, his fingers tracing a specific line, until they found a small exposed bundle of wires. One wire, barely thicker than a shoelace, had vibrated loose from its terminal, a minuscule disconnect that had caused the entire complex system to fail. It was an anomaly so tiny, so subtle, that the high-tech diagnostic tools had utterly missed it, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the machinery. Elias's brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't have tools, but his fingers were nimble, accustomed to delicate work. With a slight adjustment of his grip and a minute shift in his body, he pushed the loose wire back into its connector. There was another soft, almost silent snick, the sound of metal meeting metal, of an electrical current completing its circuit. He remained still for a moment, his head tilted, listening, sensing. A low, steady hum began to emanate from the helicopter, no longer a distress signal, but a gentle, rhythmic purr, the sound of an engine coming back to life, steady and strong. The subtle change in the helicopter's hum was almost imperceptible at first, a whisper of returning power. Then the main rotor blades, which had been completely still, began to twitch, then slowly, majestically, started to turn, picking up speed with a smooth, escalating whir. The noise grew from a gentle purr to a confident roar, the familiar sound of a powerful machine ready for flight. Elias, completely absorbed, remained knelt by the landing gear, his quiet triumph contained entirely within himself, as the enormous, grounded aircraft, baffling to so many, sprang to life under his almost magical touch. The roar of the helicopter blades, now spinning with powerful, rhythmic precision, ripped through the stunned silence that had fallen over the estate. John Sterling's jaw hung slightly agape, his usually imperious face a mask of utter disbelief. His eyes, fixed on the boy still kneeling calmly beside his now functional aircraft, held a flicker of something akin to awe, quickly followed by a deepening flush of embarrassment. The carefully constructed facade of his superiority had just crumbled, dismantled not by a rival CEO or a team of engineers, but by a quiet, unassuming child he had publicly mocked moments earlier. Mr. Chen, the lead engineer, blinked several times, as if trying to clear a persistent fog from his vision. His initial expression of professional defeat morphed into one of profound astonishment, then a slow dawning of admiration. He exchanged a wide-eyed glance with his colleagues, a silent acknowledgement of their collective failure, and Elias's quiet, undeniable triumph. The complex diagnostic tools, the hours of calculations, the high-tech theories, all had been rendered irrelevant by a child's intuitive understanding and a simple, precise adjustment. The irony was palpable, stinging in its clarity. The gathered onlookers, initially gossiping and murmuring, were now completely silent, their faces a tableau of shock and wonder. A mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes darting between the humble boy and the magnificent, now operational machine. A teenager, who had been filming the fiasco on his phone, slowly lowered it, his casual cynicism replaced by an almost reverent stillness. The air, moments before thick with tension and scorn, was now charged with a sense of the miraculous, a silent, collective recognition that they had just witnessed something extraordinary, something truly unexpected. Subtle social cues rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded almost imperceptibly, eyes met in shared disbelief. Some people shifted their weight, suddenly feeling uncomfortable in their previous judgment. The security guard, who had been about to escort Elias away, now stood frozen, his posture softening from a rigid stance of authority to one of stunned observation. The atmosphere had undergone a profound shift. The narrative of the millionaire's frustration and the engineer's incompetence had been entirely overshadowed by the quiet, undeniable brilliance of Elias. John Sterling slowly walked towards Elias, his expensive shoes crunching softly on the grass. His usual confident stride was hesitant, almost deferential. He stopped a few feet from the boy, his gaze still fixed on him, a complex mix of shame, respect, and bewildering curiosity swirling in his eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it, seemingly at a loss for words, a rare and unsettling experience for a man accustomed to dominating every conversation. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted, placing the quiet boy at the center of attention, a silent beacon of unexpected genius. Elias, oblivious to the profound impact he had just made, simply stood up, dusting off his jeans. He didn't look at Sterling, or at the engineers, or at the gaping crowd. His attention was already moving on, the problem solved, the mechanism restored. The sudden surge of the helicopter's power was a harmonious sound to his sensitive ears, a symphony of successful engineering. He had merely righted a wrong, corrected an imbalance, and in doing so had inadvertently shattered the preconceived notions of everyone present, leaving them to grapple with the unexpected and the undeniably profound truth of his silent brilliance. John Sterling, regaining his composure, took another step towards Elias. His voice, usually booming with authority, was now remarkably subdued, almost a murmur. "Boy," he began, then hesitated, clearly searching for the right words, a rare moment of humility for a man of his stature. I apologize. My behavior was inexcusable." He extended a hand, not in a handshake, but in a tentative, almost pleading gesture. "What you just did, it was remarkable, truly remarkable. My engineers, the best in the business, couldn't find it. How did you—" He trailed off, the question hanging in the air, a silent acknowledgement of a profound, unexpected wisdom. "Mr." Chen, emboldened by Sterling's apology, stepped forward. His face, no longer clouded by professional shame, held a newfound respect. "Elias," he said, using the boy's name for the first time, a small but significant detail. "That was an incredible piece of intuitive diagnostics. We rely on complex systems, but you saw something we missed, something fundamental." He didn't offer an excuse for their oversight. Instead, he offered genuine admiration. It was a rare moment of professional humility, a veteran engineer acknowledging a raw, unfiltered genius, regardless of age or social standing, a truly significant shift. Among the crowd, a young woman, a teacher from Elias's school who lived nearby and had stopped to watch, suddenly stepped forward. Her name was MS Evans, and she had always felt a quiet unease about how Elias was treated in class. Her face was flushed, a mixture of shame for her colleagues and pride for Elias. "Elias," she called out, her voice clear and kind. "That was truly amazing. I always knew you saw things differently." Her words, a simple affirmation, were a balm against the years of dismissal, a quiet recognition from an unexpected ally in the midst of public validation, a pivotal moment. Mr. Harrison, the school principal, who had also been among the onlookers, now approached, his usual stern expression replaced by a look of bewildered respect. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. "Elias," he began, his voice softer than usual, Perhaps we haven't always understood your unique strengths. I would like to invite you to visit my office on Monday. We could discuss some new opportunities." The word opportunities, from a man who usually dealt in disciplinary actions, carried significant weight, signaling a monumental shift in the school's previously rigid approach to Elias, a genuine olive branch. Elias remained impassive through these overtures. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge the apologies or the offers directly. His expression remained one of quiet introspection, as if the flurry of sudden attention was merely a new, unexpected data stream to be processed. What mattered was not his immediate acceptance or outward reaction, but the undeniable shift in the environment around him. The air, once thick with disdain, was now charged with respect, curiosity, and a nascent understanding. The silent barriers that had constrained him were visibly, audibly beginning to crumble, a profound and meaningful change. The profound shift was palpable. The way people looked at him had changed. The hushed whispers were no longer about his oddness, but about his brilliance. The dismissive glances were replaced by gazes of thoughtful consideration. This was not about Elias suddenly becoming normal or conforming. It was about the world beginning to see him for who he truly was. A quiet genius, whose unique way of interacting with the world held immense, previously untapped value. A door had opened, not because Elias had changed, but because the world around him had finally been forced to change its perspective, a symbolic and powerful victory. Later that evening, the familiar scent of his grandmother's homemade soup filled Elias's small kitchen, a comforting anchor after the day's extraordinary events. He sat at the worn wooden table, meticulously arranging his fork and spoon into a perfect parallel formation before him. Martha, usually bustling, moved with a quiet reverence, her eyes occasionally drifting towards him, a new, gentle wonder in their depths. She no longer saw just her quiet grandson, but a boy who had captivated a crowd and humbled a powerful man, a sudden, profound revelation that had irrevocably altered her perception of him. She placed a steaming bowl of soup in front of him, then sat opposite, reaching across to gently take his hand, a gesture she rarely made, understanding his aversion to unexpected touch. Her voice was soft, laced with a tremor of emotion. "Elias," she began, her gaze tender, What you did today, it was truly something special. I always knew you were smart, but—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her awe, the newfound understanding that her quiet grandson possessed a brilliance that defied easy categorization, a genius that had quietly bloomed in the background of their lives. Elias's hand remained still in hers, a rare acceptance of physical connection. He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment a hint of something resembling vulnerability softened the usual intensity of his gaze. He didn't speak, but his slight nod was a profound acknowledgement, a silent communion between them. He understood her unspoken pride, her newfound respect, and perhaps her own quiet regret for not having fully seen him before. It was an intimate exchange, far more meaningful than any words, bridging years of unspoken distance with a single, shared moment of understanding. His mind, however, was already returning to the intricate schematics of the helicopter, replaying the sequence of the repair, verifying its flawless execution. The external validation, while impactful for others, was secondary for Elias. The true satisfaction lay in the elegant solution, the perfect alignment of cause and effect, the mechanical symphony restored. His brilliance was an intrinsic part of him, an internal world that existed independently of external recognition. But moments like these quiet affirmations from those he cared for added a new, gentle layer of warmth to his solitary triumphs. Martha gently squeezed his hand. "The principal called, Elias," she whispered, her voice filled with a hopeful anticipation. "He said he wants to talk about opportunities at school. Maybe things will be different now." She watched his face for a reaction, but Elias remained impassive, his thoughts already drifting to new puzzles, new patterns waiting to be deciphered. Yet the subtle shift in her voice, the tenderness in her touch, created a new, soothing rhythm in his world, a quiet acceptance that felt like a gentle embrace. The soup, a familiar comfort, tasted richer tonight. Elias slowly lifted his spoon, its metallic gleam reflecting the soft kitchen light. The day's events had been a chaotic whirlwind of unexpected attention and profound shifts, but here, in the quiet sanctuary of his home, with his grandmother's gentle presence, a sense of peace settled over him. His genius had been revealed not for the world but for himself, a quiet vindication of his unique way of seeing and understanding. The moment was not about celebration, but about a deep internal affirmation of his own worth, a quiet understanding of his place in the world. The reverberations of Elias's quiet demonstration echoed through Northwood Elementary in the following weeks. In the staff room, hushed conversations replaced the usual complaints about budget cuts and demanding parents. Mrs. Jenkins, usually set in her ways, was observed thoughtfully reading an article on neurodiversity, a subtle but significant shift in her perspective. Mr. Chen, the helicopter engineer, even arranged a special visit to the school, quietly speaking with Mr. Harrison about the possibility of creating a junior innovation lab, a space where students like Elias could tinker and explore without the constraints of traditional curriculum, a revolutionary idea for their underfunded school. Mr. Harrison, spurred by the public display of Elias's genius and perhaps a newfound understanding of untapped potential, began to initiate small but meaningful changes. He started observing Elias more closely in class, not with a critical eye, but with genuine curiosity. He began to understand that Elias's quietness wasn't defiance, but intense concentration, and his unique methods weren't wrong, just different. This subtle shift in his perspective began to trickle down, influencing his interactions with other students, who also deviated from the norm, fostering a slightly more tolerant and open environment within the school's rigid structure. In Elias's classroom, Mrs. Jenkins, though still navigating the complexities of her new understanding, made an effort. She started offering alternative ways for Elias to demonstrate his knowledge, allowing him to draw diagrams or build models instead of always writing essays. While still imperfect, these small accommodations were a world away from the rigid expectations that had previously stifled him. She even, on one occasion, sought out Elias's opinion when the classroom projector malfunctioned, acknowledging, albeit indirectly, his unique problem-solving abilities, a tentative step towards true inclusion. The students, too, began to shift. The initial shock and awe gradually gave way to a grudging respect, and for some a nascent curiosity. A few classmates, those who previously had ignored or even teased Elias, would occasionally approach him during recess, not to mock but to tentatively ask about the cool helicopter trick. Elias didn't engage in lengthy conversations, but the absence of derision, the shift from exclusion to a hesitant interest, was a profound transformation in his social landscape, a tentative step towards acceptance. Martha, Elias's grandmother, became a quiet advocate, armed with a newfound confidence. She began attending parent-teacher conferences, not with apologies for Elias's quirks, but with quiet pride, gently suggesting ways the school could better support his learning style. She spoke with other parents of neurodivergent children in the community, sharing her story, unknowingly becoming a beacon of hope and a catalyst for broader conversations about inclusive education. Her quiet strength, rooted in her love for Elias, began to ripple outwards, inspiring others to demand better for their own children. The seeds of transformation had been planted, not with grand pronouncements, but with subtle yet powerful shifts in individual perceptions and daily interactions. The world around Elias was slowly, tentatively beginning to adapt to him, rather than demanding he adapt to it. The initial incident with the helicopter had been a dramatic catalyst, but the real, enduring change was happening in the quiet moments of re-evaluation, the softening of hardened attitudes, and the gradual compassionate awakening to the profound value of neurodiversity within the school and the wider community. Elias still walked with his head slightly bowed, his gaze often fixed on the intricate patterns of the sidewalk rather than the faces of those around him. He still found loud noises overwhelming and large crowds unsettling. The world had not magically become a perfectly harmonious place for him, nor had he suddenly transformed into someone he wasn't. His inherent differences, the unique way his brilliant mind processed the universe, remained an integral part of his being. The struggle, in many ways, would continue, a quiet journey of navigating a world often built for a different kind of mind. But now, a subtle yet profound shift had occurred. One afternoon, a few weeks after the helicopter incident, Elias was sitting under the old oak tree at school, meticulously arranging fallen leaves by their vein patterns. A group of classmates, instead of ignoring him, chose to play their game of tag a little further away, their laughter softer, more mindful of his quiet space. A subtle nod from one of the boys, a flicker of acknowledgement rather than exclusion, was a testament to the fragile yet growing empathy that had begun to blossom. The world hadn't fully understood him, but it had begun to see him, and that made all the difference, a small victory in a larger, ongoing battle. He still didn't seek out social interaction, but the interactions that now found him were tinged with a newfound respect. Mr. Chen occasionally sent him complex engineering puzzles by mail, challenges that Elias would quietly solve and return, creating a silent intellectual dialogue that transcended age and social barriers. These were not attempts to fix Elias, but genuine acknowledgements of his profound capabilities, offering avenues for his genius to flourish on its own terms, a rare and precious form of validation that nurtured his spirit without demanding conformity. The helicopter, now a distant memory, had been a catalyst, a dramatic moment that forced an arrogant world to confront its biases. But the true story, the enduring transformation, lay in the quiet aftermath. The teacher rethinking her methods, the principal opening his mind, the community starting to grapple with the richness of neurodiversity. Elias had not asked for this change. He had simply existed, brilliantly, authentically, until his quiet light could no longer be ignored, compelling others to adjust their focus, to see beyond the surface, and to recognize the inherent value in all forms of intelligence. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the playground, Elias stood up, brushing the dirt from his jeans. He held a perfectly preserved multi-lobed leaf in his hand, its intricate patterns a miniature masterpiece. He looked up at the sky, not with the intense analytical gaze he usually reserved for machines, but with a quiet, contemplative expression. The setting sun painted the clouds in hues of orange and purple, a complex, ever-shifting pattern, Another magnificent display of the universe's silent, intricate design, a pattern that, for Elias, held both beauty and profound logical meaning. He walked home, his steps steady, his figure small against the vastness of the evening sky. A door had opened, a barrier had been broken. While many aspects of the world might still misunderstand him, one truth had become undeniably clear. His genius spoke for itself, a powerful, silent language that transcended words and expectations. Elias, the quiet boy who saw the world in intricate detail, moved forward, not with a triumphant roar, but with the quiet dignity of someone who knew their worth. A silent revolution leaving an indelible mark on the world, one pattern at a time.